Good morning, everyone. I'm very thankful again for the opportunity to preach while Pastor David is out of town. We do want to keep him in prayer. He's up there for his grandmother's funeral, so pray for the whole family as they are out of town. If you are using a Pew Bible today, we're going to be in Proverbs. If you're using the Pew Bible, that's on page 625. If you notice in your bulletin, the text for today just says Proverbs. It doesn't get any more specific than that. The reason for that, I can explain to you, is because I wanted to preach from Proverbs, and especially the middle section. We'll talk about the different sections of Proverbs in a moment. But Proverbs is an interesting case when preaching through the Bible because most of Proverbs is disjointed from the rest of it. When you get into the middle sections, especially in chapters 10 through 29, every single verse is more or less unrelated to the ones around it. It makes it very hard to have a unified message, which of course was also my goal. I don't want to leave you with 50 different applications. I'd like to have one point that we can narrow around. But I did want to preach from that section of Proverbs, so today may feel a little bit different. What we're going to do is look at the theology of Proverbs, look at what wisdom is and how do we seek it. We're not going to exhaust all of Proverbs, but we will look at a few individual Proverbs as well. So I hope that this is beneficial to you. It may seem a little more like a lesson than a sermon, but I am much more of a teacher than a preacher anyway, so I think that'll be fine for us. So page 625 if you're using the Pew Bible. If not, just turn to Proverbs, and you can just open up to the very beginning there. Proverbs is a part of the wisdom literature of Scripture. Those books usually are, people point out 3 different books: Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and Job. Song of Songs is sometimes included in there, but they're an interesting case because they are very different from the rest of Scripture. Most of the rest of the Old Testament is focused on God's relationship with Israel. Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes don't talk about that much at all. Job, in fact, is not even written about an Israelite. Job was not a part of the Israelite people. So what do those have to do with the rest of the Old Testament? Some people will say that they don't. We should see these as a different category. There's what they might call the election literature that talks about Israel and God's relationship with Israel. And then there is the wisdom literature, which talks about God as the judge of the wicked and the creator of the world. There might be some truth to that, and there's some differences between these different texts for sure. But I think that we should relate it to the rest of Scripture. I think there is a connection, and I think that Proverbs especially is very helpful for understanding that connection. So we'll start in Proverbs chapter 1. We'll look at the first 7 verses of chapter 1 of Proverbs. I think this will help us to understand. This is kind of the introduction to the book in these 7 verses. And I think if we read it, it will help us to understand what Proverbs, and by extension these other wisdom literature books, have to do with the rest of Scripture. So hopefully you're turned there by now. Proverbs chapter 1, starting in verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. So there we have just the title of the book, the Proverbs of Solomon, and it describes who Solomon is, the son of David, king of Israel. The next 5 verses tell us who Proverbs is written to and what it is written for. Starting in verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. So we have some explanation here of what Proverbs is for. It's to know wisdom and to know instruction, to understand, to learn how to deal righteously, justly, and with equity. And then it tells us who Proverbs is for, and it gives us 2 different people. It says to give prudence to the simple. If you have a different translation, it might say the inexperienced. Knowledge and discretion to the youth. So the youth and the simple, that's the first person that Proverbs is for. those who are inexperienced and unwise, those who are young and haven't spent time in the world yet to have wisdom for themselves. Proverbs is for those people. And in fact, if you look at the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, it's written as though from a father to a son. He often addresses his readers as my son. So it's for the inexperienced. It's for those who still need to gain wisdom. But what if you already have wisdom? What if you're already a wise person? Well, chapter 1, verse 5 says, "Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance." So if you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm already a very wise person, should I just step out and come back in when the sermon is over? Good news, this applies to you as well. If you are a wise person, you can increase in learning by studying the wisdom of Proverbs. So Proverbs is made for both the inexperienced and for the wise. Verse 7, this is the last part of the introduction, says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." And I think that this verse here, this first half of the verse, is key to understanding why Proverbs, or how Proverbs relates to the rest of the Old Testament. It may not talk about God's relationship with Israel very much, but it does say that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. What does it mean to fear the Lord? Well, that's a very big topic. A lot of people have talked about that over the years. But I think very simply we can say, based on other sections of Scripture that talk about fearing the Lord, we can say that it means to keep his commandments and to have a relationship with him. The beginning of wisdom, I think Proverbs is saying, is to have a relationship with God. If you do not have a relationship with the Lord, you are going to find it very hard to gain wisdom. You may be able to find some wisdom, but the one who fears the Lord, the one who has a relationship with the Lord, will be able to increase in wisdom much more than the one who can't, because he has that base of the fear of the Lord. So Israel, of course, did have a relationship with God. They had that base. We as Christians have a relationship with the Lord, and that is the start to wisdom. The second part of the verse says, "Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So those who fear the Lord, those who fear God, seek wisdom, or seek knowledge, as this part says. Those who despise wisdom are those who do not fear the Lord. They are the fools. So there is one person that this book is not for, and that is for the fool. The fool will not appreciate the wisdom of Proverbs because they do not have a relationship with God and they do not desire to seek his wisdom. All right, well, hopefully nobody here is a fool, and we can all say that we all need wisdom. Whether you are wise or inexperienced, we need wisdom. But what does it mean to seek it? Proverbs, as I mentioned, is divided into 3 different sections. The first section, chapters 1 through 9, we already talked about a little bit. It's a series of discourses, a series of sermons almost, or lessons on how to be wise, and it's written from a father to a son. We'll spend a little bit of time in that. The second section, chapters 10 through 29, is a bunch of individual proverbs. Most of them have nothing to do with each other. They're just short, pithy sayings that provide wisdom. And then the last 2 chapters, which unfortunately we won't get to at all today, but I'd encourage you, of course, to read them on your own, chapters 30 and 31, are wisdom from people other than Solomon. The first 29 chapters are all wisdom from Solomon. The last 2 chapters are from others. As we look at Proverbs 1 through 9, it helps us to understand the rest of the book, because it presents us a couple of choices. We have a choice between wisdom and folly. And the father, as he's writing to his son, he presents them almost as potential spouses. There is Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, and the son has to choose which he is going to marry, Lady Wisdom or Lady Folly. Both are calling out to him. If you'll turn now to Proverbs 9, you can see this throughout the first 9 chapters, but Proverbs 9 is a nice short summary of what these chapters have been saying. And they show these 2 women, Wisdom and Folly, as calling out to this young man. Chapter 9 will start in verse 1, and it begins with wisdom. Wisdom, and remember this is wisdom personified, so this is a woman she is wisdom, the essence of wisdom. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has set out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. To him who lacks sense, she says, Come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. And you'll notice here, in these few verses, there's a lot of parallels to that first section that we were reading, the summary or the introduction to Proverbs. The scoffer here is like the fool who does not want wisdom. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man, incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Again, a parallel to that first section that we read. The knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself. If you scoff, you alone will bear it. In that first section, we have Lady Wisdom. She is calling out to this young man, begging him to come, sit at her table, eat her bread, drink her wine, and leave his simple ways behind. But there's somebody else calling out to him as well. And in verse 13, we see the other woman, his other potential spouse. The woman Folly is loud. She is seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. And to him who lacks sense, she says, Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. This second woman, Folly, there's a lot of similarities between her and Wisdom. She's calling out to the inexperienced and to the one who lacks sense. She has water and bread for him to eat, just like the other woman had meat and bread and wine. But her water is stolen, and her bread is eaten in secret, presumably because it also is stolen. And of course, the big statement at the end of the chapter is that the dead are in her house. Her guests are in the depths of Sheol. So Proverbs presents us as well this choice between wisdom and folly. As we get into these later verses, we don't see the woman wisdom or the woman folly as much, but we do still have this choice between wisdom and folly. Sometimes you'll see the wise talked about as the righteous or the diligent or the faithful, and the fool might be talked about as the wicked or the sluggard or the adulterer or the scoffer. But I think these are all used as synonyms of each other in this book. And we always have this choice between wisdom and folly. Both are calling out to us, and we need to decide which one we are going to listen to. Of course, our goal today is to listen to woman wisdom and to hear her call. So we'll begin now to get into this middle section of Proverbs, Proverbs 10 through 29. We'll just pick a few different Proverbs out of here, and our goal is going to be to hear the call of woman wisdom. But before we do talk about the individual Proverbs, there's one more thing that needs to be said. And that is that a couple different things, I suppose. First of all, Proverbs are general truths. Proverbs are general truths. What does that mean? It means that not every proverb is always pertinent. We need to use discretion and wisdom to understand when to apply these proverbs. There's a few of them, perhaps, that are solid promises that are always true, but many of them are not. Many of them are statements of wisdom, and we need to use discretion to understand when to apply them. I'll give you an example of this. If you'll turn with me quickly to Proverbs 26, or if you prefer, you can just listen. That's fine as well. Proverbs 26, verse 4. Proverbs 26, verse 4. Says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself." I'll read it again. "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself." What is that proverb telling us? It's telling us that we already know the fool does not want to listen to wisdom. If you tell a fool his folly, he's not going to listen to it. You're stooping to his level and becoming a fool yourself because you're wasting your time trying to instruct the one who is foolish. But before you think that that is always true and we should never tell the fool his folly, look at the following verse. "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Verse 4 says, answer not a fool according to his folly. And verse 5 says, answer a fool according to his folly. Is this a mistake in God's word, that there's this contradiction? Obviously not. There's not a contradiction here. What the author is saying, or the one who compiled these Proverbs of Solomon is saying, is that we can't apply every proverb to every situation. We need to use wisdom. There are times when it is appropriate to answer a fool according to his folly, to correct him in his way. And there are other times when it is worthless and it is foolish to waste your time talking to a fool and trying to correct him because he's not going to listen to you. And we need to use discretion to learn when that is. So Proverbs are general truths, but they are also general truths. If you were following along in your notes, I'm sorry if that was a little bit disappointing to have general truths and general truths right in a row. But general truths, what does that mean? We can't just ignore the truth of an individual proverb because we know that there are many times when it is not the case. Again, I'll try to give you an example here. If you turn to Proverbs 10, verse 15, or just listen to me read it. Proverbs 10, verse 15. This verse says, a rich man's wealth is his strong city. The poverty of the poor is their ruin. A rich man's wealth is his strong city. The poverty of the poor is their ruin. So what's this verse saying? Well, first of all, there's a common way of studying Proverbs, which I think is very helpful, where somebody will look through all these chapters, pick out all the Proverbs that talk about wealth, put them all together, study them all together, and figure out what does Proverbs say about wealth. I think that's a very helpful way to do it. But we're going to do it a different way today, because I think an issue that can come from that way of studying Proverbs is that we can overlook certain truths and lean into ones that are more clear to us, because we know also there are Proverbs that say you should give your money to others, give away your money, and it will come back to you. Or we know that there are Proverbs that say that the one who is wealthy or who relies too much on his wealth is doomed. We might look at those Proverbs and say, well, all right, wealth is helpful, but of course these other things are much more important. But this verse is not surrounded by other verses that say wealth is not helpful. This verse simply says, a rich man's wealth is his strong city. The poverty of the poor is their ruin. So we don't want to ignore the truth of this one proverb in favor of others. It is useful to have wealth in this world. The one who has wealth will have an easier time in this world than those who do not. So Proverbs are general truths. We want to understand both of those things as we look at them today. We want to keep both of those things in mind. Let's look now at a few individual Proverbs. Today I'm using the ESV version, which is what we use most often in our church. That's what our pew Bibles are. You might find if you're using a different version that your proverb is slightly different than what mine says, and it may seem even like it changes the meaning of the proverb. The reason for that is that Hebrew poetry is very terse. It's very brief and compact. And when you're translating it, it's very difficult sometimes to know what exactly the proverb means. So I think it's very helpful to look at several different translations and see what are the different things this proverb could mean. But today, just for time's sake, we'll be looking only at the English Standard Version. But again, I would encourage you to look at other versions as you have the time. Let's turn now to our first proverb, chapter 13, verse 7. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7. This verse says, one pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. So what is this proverb talking about? Well, it could be a couple things. It could be talking about how people spend money. One pretends to be rich. One spends money as though he is rich. He spends it frivolously. He buys expensive things. But in reality, he's poor. He's not careful with his money, so he has none. On the other hand, one pretends to be poor. One may seem as though he has no money because he's so careful with it. But in reality, he's very rich. Because he is so careful with his money, he's able to save it and use it for things that are important. I'll probably be using a lot of examples from UPS today. That's where I work. There are an abundance of fools at UPS. So it's a very good source for understanding these proverbs. I have a friend there who constantly talks to me about how poor he is. He doesn't have enough money to make ends meet. He's living paycheck to paycheck. And yet he also has recently told me that he just bought a boat. He also has a very nice truck. So this guy, if you were to look at him from the outside, he may appear to be rich. He may appear to be very wealthy. And yet in reality, he barely has enough money to get by. And he is living in debt because he has made foolish choices. So that could be what the proverb is talking about. We might also see it as talking about spiritual wealth compared to physical wealth. One pretends to be rich, meaning he has great material wealth, but in reality, he has nothing. He has no family who loves him. He has no relationship with the Lord. What he has is not important. On the other hand, the poor man, one who pretends to be poor, he may appear poor in life, but really he has great wealth because he does have a relationship with God. So there are a couple different things this proverb could mean. What does it mean for us as we read it? What is the call for us? What is the call of wisdom on our lives? I think the call is for us to be discerning, to not judge somebody based on their appearance, not to covet somebody who may appear to have great wealth because we don't truly know what their circumstance is. Our call is to be wise and discerning. That's what wisdom, I believe, is calling us to do in this verse. Let's look at another proverb in chapter 10, verse 12. Chapter 10, verse 12 says, "Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses." Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. It's interesting if you look at the previous verse. Chapter 10, verse 11 says, "The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence." That verse is talking about how we speak to others. Verse 12, I think, is talking about how we respond to others, especially those who have offended us. When somebody offends us, do we cover up their offense? I think this picture is like a theater. If you can imagine a theater, somebody on the stage, do we display them for the world to see, or do we cover it up when someone offends us? And I think the call of wisdom here is to overlook offenses. There are times, of course, when we need to reprove our brothers and sisters when they offend us or when they are sinning. But there are times, according to this proverb, when hatred stirs up strife. It is our hatred for them that won't let these offenses go and won't forgive others, but love covers up offenses. Now, you might think offenses is rather small, and I think this might be talking about some smaller things, maybe a misplaced word or something like that. But it does remind me of 1 Corinthians chapter 6. You're welcome to turn there if you want, but if not, you can just listen to me read it. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. In this book, the Apostle Paul is writing to the Corinthian church, and he brings up several issues that they have in their church. One of them is a believer that has brought another believer to court over a dispute they have. And Paul is not very happy about that. I'll read verses 1 through 8 for you. 1 Corinthians 6, 1 through 8. "When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you not know that we are to judge angels? How much more then matters pertaining to this life? So if you have such cases, why do you lay them before those who have no standing in the church?" What is Paul saying here? He's saying, we as believers are brothers and sisters in Christ, and we know that in the last days we are the ones who will judge the world. So why are we going to the unrighteous to settle our disputes? He continues in verse 5, "I say this to your shame. Can it be that there is no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between the brothers? But brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers. To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you." And then listen to these next words that he says. "Why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud even your own brothers." This, in contrast to Proverbs, seems like it might be a much more serious case. And yet here Paul still says, why not rather be defrauded by your brother than go to court with unbelievers? We as believers don't need to get hung up on every offense that comes our way, on every trial that comes our way. When somebody wrongs us, we don't need to bring them to justice ourselves. That is not our call. Now, Paul, of course, does expect that the believers within the church will be able to resolve this dispute. He doesn't say it shouldn't be resolved at all. But he is appalled that a believer would take another believer to a secular court to solve a dispute rather than just being defrauded. It would be better to just accept the offense and let it rest on you than to take your brother to court. So again, these are general truths. There is a time when it is correct to reprove a brother, and I think Paul would say that is one of them, that brother should be reproved within the church, just not without the church. But there are also times, especially perhaps with smaller offenses, where we as believers can forgive the offense and not hold it against our brother. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. The call for wisdom here, or the call of wisdom here, is to overlook offenses. Turn a couple pages over now to chapter 13, verse 10. Chapter 13 of Proverbs, verse 10. By insolence comes nothing but strife, but with those who take advice is wisdom. The contrast here is between taking advice and not taking advice. The second part of the verse says, those who take advice, with those who take advice is wisdom. And I think the implication here with the insolent person, by insolence, is that this insolent person is too proud to take advice. He thinks he understands everything. He doesn't need wisdom. We might compare him to the fool that we talked about earlier. By insolence comes nothing but strife. So this man who will not take wisdom from others, who will not take counsel from others, he gets nothing but strife in his life. Again, I'll bring up an example from UPS. There was a new hire there. I'm a supervisor at UPS, so part of my job is to train the new hires when they come in. Most of them do very well. A couple of them struggle because they have difficulty figuring out the job. But there was one new hire in particular that comes to my mind when I read this verse, because he did not want to be trained. He thought that he should be able to figure it out by himself, and he was embarrassed when I came over to give him some advice. Now, I've been there a few years. I've been a supervisor. I've been training people. I understand the different methods that can be helpful to help you be more efficient in your job, where it's a very fast-paced job and we need to be efficient. I also understand the methods that will keep you safe as you're working, because there are a lot of moving parts and we need to be careful to work safely. But this guy, he wanted me to tell him what to do and then leave him alone. He didn't want me to stand there with him and explain to him how to do the job safely and efficiently. Because of that, he lasted about 2 weeks before he quit. He just couldn't figure out the job because he refused to accept counsel. Lack of counsel results in strife. If he had allowed me to teach him, he was a clever enough person, I think he could have figured it out and done well at the job. But he wouldn't accept counsel. So what is the call of Proverbs here? The insolent one who will not receive counsel comes to nothing but strife, but those who take advice is wisdom. So the call of wisdom here is to seek counsel from others. Seek and accept counsel from others. I think that can be easy to do when the person we are taking counsel from seems to be wiser and more mature than us, but it can be hard to do when the person trying to give us counsel seems to be less wise than us or less mature than us. But still, I think the call here is to seek counsel, to listen to the words of that person. They may be wrong, but we can still accept their counsel and consider it. The call of wisdom here is to seek counsel. Our next proverb is in chapter 15, verse 23. Proverbs 15:23. Proverbs 15:23 says, "To make an apt answer is a joy to a man, and a word in season, how good it is." To make an apt answer is a joy to a man, and a word in season, how good it is. So the previous proverb that we looked at was about receiving advice. This one is about giving advice. And I think a question here that we need to ask is, can you give a right word at the wrong time? Good advice, but you give it at the wrong time, the time that is not in season? Or could you give the word in season, but it's the wrong word? And of course, the answer to both of those is yes, you can. This proverb says to give an apt answer or a right answer in season, how good it is. Both of those things are important. So what is the call of wisdom here? It's not just to throw out our wisdom everywhere and hope that somewhere it sticks, and that will bring us joy. The call, I think, if we look at that apt and in season, the call for us here of wisdom is to give considered counsel. To give considered counsel to others, to be wise in our counsel. And in order to give good wisdom, we first have to gain wisdom. So the call of wisdom is to gain wisdom for ourselves so that we can give right wisdom at the right time to others. And that will be a great joy to us. Another proverb for us is found in chapter 26, verse 13. Proverbs enjoys parodying the sluggard or the lazy person. You see all kinds of verses about him, how he turns on his bed like a door on its hinges, and he puts his hand in the dish and is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. All kinds of things like that. They're really funny, actually. This is another example of that. Chapter 26, verse 13 says, "The sluggard says, 'There is a lion in the road. There is a lion in the streets.'" So what is the meaning of this proverb? The sluggard, he's a lazy person. He doesn't want to do the work. So his way of getting out of work is to shout out that there's a lion in the streets. He can't go to work because he might be devoured. Again, UPS, I have received all kinds of calls. I work in the early morning around 2 a.m. We usually start our shift around 3, but I get there early and I receive a lot of the phone calls of the workers who say they cannot come to work. Some of them are legitimate excuses. Sometimes there's a guy who is there all the time, and one day out of the year he calls and says he's sick, and I tend to believe that person. But if I were to believe all of them, I would have to understand that these people have a series of unfortunate events. Do you know that series? There's a children's book series called A Series of Unfortunate Events about 3 orphans. It's kind of a dark humor children's series. There's a series of unfortunate events that befalls the employees of UPS, especially around holidays and Derby season. There tend to be a lot of sick people. There's a second flu season, I guess, that comes in during Derby weekend. There's a lot of car trouble that these people have. It seems every other day people have trouble with their cars. One person called us to tell us his house was burning down. Maybe it was, but if so, I don't think we would be the first person for him to call while his house is currently burning down. That's the kind of thing you can call about afterward and say, "Sorry, I missed work, my house was on fire." One person called us to tell us he had been put under arrest. Maybe. He was there the next day, so it at least wasn't a serious arrest. All kinds of excuses, though, that we hear as these people are calling in. And I think, though some of them I'm sure are true, a lot of them come from laziness. Somebody doesn't want to come to work, they have to have a reason to call in, and so they make up an excuse. Just like this sluggard. There were lions in the area in those days, but in the middle of a city, wild animals tend to avoid being in public areas, especially big predators like that. It would be very uncommon to find one in the middle of the city. But that's the sluggard's excuse for why he can't do his work. So what is the call here? It is not to make excuses to avoid our hard work. Even to ourselves, I think we can add. I tend to make excuses to myself when I don't want to do something. I'm too tired, or there are other things that I want to do, and I move towards them instead of the things that are more important. So don't make excuses for your work. That's the call of wisdom. Avoid excuses and do the hard work that you need to do. We'll look at just a couple more here, maybe just one more. Chapter 12, verse 18. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18. It says, "There is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." There's a contrast here between sword thrusts, obviously, and healing. One whose rash words, what does it mean by rash words? Well, it could be offensive things, but because of the next part of the verse, "but the tongue of the wise brings healing," I wonder if it's talking about reproofs. A rash tongue, somebody who is quick to reprove somebody or constantly reproves somebody, that can be like a sword thrust. Of course, we know that reproof is necessary at times, but to reprove somebody over and over is like a stab in the gut, or it can be, this proverb is saying. But the tongue of the wise brings healing. So again, I don't want to say we shouldn't reprove people. We certainly know from Scripture that there is a time for reproof. But I think there is also a time when reproof can be too harsh. Somebody is not ready to be reproved. We might need to wait. Or perhaps after we reprove the person, we should stop reproving them and offer them words of healing instead of a constant reproof after reproof that just brings the person down. So what is the call of wisdom here? The call is to use wise words and gentle words that will heal somebody and bring them up rather than stabbing them over and over with our rash words. So there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of other proverbs in this book. I would encourage you, if you do not read Proverbs often, you should pick it up and read it through. Read it through a couple times and take it slowly. I sometimes will listen to the Bible on my way into work in the mornings, and Proverbs is always frustrating because each line is a different proverb and the guy just rattles right through them, and I can't concentrate on any of them. So take the time to sit down and read it for yourself. Take the time to think about these different proverbs. And I think the more that we read Proverbs and the more we have it in our mind, the more we will be able to follow the call of wisdom instead of the call of folly. And of course, in closing, we always remember that it is the fear of the Lord that is the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of wisdom. So if you do not have that relationship with God, you may be able to get some wisdom, but you will not be able to get the level of wisdom that you can get if you are someone who loves the Lord and who is following him and fearing him in your life. Let's pray in closing here. Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the wisdom that comes from it, for all that we can learn from your word. I pray that we as a church would be one that is marked by wisdom, by righteousness, and by fear of the Lord, rather than one that is marked by foolish decisions and running after folly and all kinds of other sin. Watch over each of our lives. Help us to read your word rightly and often so that we can understand what wisdom is. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who saved us, amen.